Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to It Says What, where JW3 and Limmud come together to bring you unexpected and poignant Jewish content from across the Jewish community every week before Shabbat. I'm Joe Hyman, JW3's young adult programmer, and JW3 is the UK's Jewish Community and Arts Centre. We are partnering to bring you this program with Limmud, a diverse and inclusive worldwide community of Jewish learning. Our building is closed, but we are very much open and continue to offer a broad range of programs. We are really excited to share with you our event coming up next week, Revelation, partnering with Limmud to bring you a virtual Tikkun Leil Shavuot experience with educators, comedians, performers, and musicians exploring what we can learn from darkness. The program is live online and tickets are only £5. But if you can give more, this will go to support JW3, Limmud, and all of our freelance presenters who've been affected by this pandemic. This series will ask educators, artists, and leaders from across the Jewish community all over the world to share a surprising piece of Jewish wisdom for our time. To ask your own questions about the text we'll talk about today, please comment on our live feed, and we will take some towards the end. I am delighted to welcome Laynie Soloman, my friend. Yes, I am a friend with a lot of the educators. It's because I love education. A passionate teacher of Jewish text, thought, and ritual who believes deeply in the power of Talmud study as a healing and liberatory communal spiritual practice. They serve as a faculty member and director of national learning at Svara, a traditionally radical yeshiva, where they direct Svara's teaching kollel, which is lifting up a new generation of queer and trans Beit Midrash facilitators. Laynie is also completing a dual MA in Talmudic and Rabbinic Literature and Jewish Education at JTS in New York and holds a BA in Religious Studies from Gausha College. I can vouch for the fact that they love facilitating experiences of Jewish learning that uplift the piously irreverent, queer, and subversive spirit of rabbinic text and theology. And they have taught and lectured on these topics in various community spaces, campuses, and in academic settings. When not in shul or learning Talmud, you can find Laynie reading about liberation theology, collecting comic books, and singing lots of great nigunim. Those are tunes. Before you share our text, Laynie, I wanted to say welcome. How are you? And where are you? And I want to throw out a question to you after you've answered that, which is, talk to us about the healing practice of Talmud. That's new to some of our audience, I think. And what do you mean by that? And what can we learn from that?
Awesome. So grateful to be here, y'all. And I'll say where I am is I'm in Philadelphia. So I generally live in New York City. So it's a bit early for me. Good afternoon to you and good morning to me. I generally live in New York City, and for the duration of the pandemic so far, I've been hunkering down with my family in Philadelphia. How am I? I'm energized and excited to talk Torah with you this morning. I'm so excited about the frame of this conversation of It Says What, sort of exploring unexpected wisdom from maybe outrageous texts, which happens to be one of my favorite things to do. And yeah, what an audacious claim that there is a healing and liberatory practice in communal study of Talmud. So what I mean by that is I think, and we at Svara, where I teach and learn, I think that the Beit Midrash, the place, sort of like the home of Jewish learning, the physical spaces, and now also the virtual spaces in which we learn Torah, are actually some of the best places to figure out who we are. While we're studying Talmud, we're actually studying us. We're studying what it means to be human, what it means to be human in connection with other people. And something specifically about sort of the form and the method and sometimes the content, which maybe we'll see, of the Talmud, I think really sets us up to have some of those profoundly introspective and healing experiences of really seeing ourselves, working through it with another person, and doing that through the language of our ancestors, which I think is an incredible gift, and has certainly been an incredibly liberatory practice in my own life. Also, it's just freaking fun. which I think is a really deeply powerful and liberatory thing, just having fun for people who hold marginalized identities. The permission to have fun while learning, I think, can be incredibly liberatory. Yeah.
Thank you so
happy
much.
to say more about that.
Thank you. Well, it's a gift to be seeing Talmud in that frame that you've just shared. I think for a lot of people that will be a way to see Talmud in a new and an unexpected way, but one that is healing and liberatory. So thank you so much for sharing. So tell us, what is your unexpected text?
Yeah, great. So my unexpected text is a two-part text. First, we're going to look at a text from the Talmud Bavli, from the Babylonian Talmud, the text that I just professed is so powerful and liberatory. So you'll see, you'll let me know. From a section in Yevamot. So we're going to look at that text, and then we're going to look at what a Hasidic master, Rabbi Nachman, has to say about that text, or sort of through that text. And for me, I would like categorize this as in like a pithy source sheet way, learning to kiss our ancestors. This text is about kissing our ancestors through the practice of learning, which to me, when I first came across this text, felt slightly outrageous, semi-offensive, super intriguing, kind of gross, sort of all of those things, but has really helped anchor me in a particular orientation to learning Torah, which I'm just excited to dig into. So that's what we're up to. Today, we're going to learn how to kiss our ancestors, and we're going to learn in order to kiss our ancestors. And we'll understand what I mean by both of those, hopefully in about 15 minutes. Okay, so should we just dig in?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay.
I'm excited.
Great. So we're starting, I want to give just like a sentence of background here for the text that we're about to look at, which is this section from the Talmud Bavli in Yevamot, which is in the rabbinic tradition, in the rabbinic mind, there is a tremendous emphasis. Emphasis is like an understatement. I don't even know the word. It's like the most important thing to state and share teachings that you speak in the name of the one who taught it to you. That is like a foundational rabbinic orientation to learning and to teaching and to being immersed in Torah, is like you have to you have to cite your sources really, really deeply. And there's a lot we could say about that, but that's sort of a really important piece. And so what happens before this section that you have in front of you is that doesn't happen. There's a story in which someone offers a teaching and doesn't cite it in the name of the one who originally said it. And basically like chaos ensues. It's an amazing other text for another moment, but like Torahs start ripping spontaneously from rage and it's incredible. And as part of this conversation sort of moves into a plea from King David, who basically sort of like begs God to be to have his teachings quoted in his name once he's passed. He's like, God, and this is the first section of the text, please, God, let it be your will that the sages, that people in the world will say a teaching in my name in this world once I have passed on to the next world. And so just a sort of like phrase that I want to tease out there is Sheyamru davar shmua mipi, from my mouth. So I think specifically the piece I want to tease out is mipi, that they say the teaching literally from my mouth, which is the way to say that they cite me. So there's something sort of funky in that language, that they will say a thing that's a teaching from my mouth. And the way that's the sort of like nomenclature for citation. They say the thing from my mouth. So that already is super odd. The mouth emphasis is super intriguing. So in the next piece, we get sort of an explanation for why why David HaMelech would want this to happen so specifically. Like, why would you care? You're dead. That's like, why would that be so important to you? And so we get this teaching quoted, the rabbis then model quoting someone effectively. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, any Torah scholar in whose name a matter of shmuah, an oral teaching, or a matter of halacha is said in this world, his lips mouth the words in the grave. So we could spend like 10 hours just talking about that sentence, but just to really like thicken up what's being said here is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is saying, part of what David HaMelech is requesting is that his teachings are shared in his name. And the reason that he's doing that is because once someone has passed, if someone offers a teaching and quotes it in their name, their mouths, while they're in the grave, start moving. Their mouths are sort of like mimicking the teaching as it's happening, even though they've passed. So I'll say like, Dayenu just to talk about this, which is an outrageous idea, I think, that invites us to think a little bit about what it means to be a part of a living oral tradition, right? Specifically the orality of the tradition where your mouth is moving once you've passed, where people are evoking your name and your teachings, that it's like your teachings are never separate from your body. And also like your teachings are alive within you even as you've passed. So that's sort of the backdrop to then what Rabbi Nachman, I think, takes like 200 steps further in the realm of like intimacy and erotic connection that's powerful and present in Torah learning. So that's the first piece. And yeah, so Rabbi Nachman's going to take that to the next place. And here's sort of what Rabbi Nachman does. Rabbi Nachman builds on this text. He does a little trick, which is he doesn't always tell you the text he's interacting with until the end. It's like he wants to really give you a nice punchline. But so he has this text in the back of his mind, and he now is going to introduce us to a theological exploration of what happens when we learn Torah. And he starts, built into what he's saying is there's a difference, but the rabbis understand there to be two kinds of Torah. There's one Torah, and many folks may be familiar with this. There's one Torah that's written Torah. That's like the Torah in the book that you can like hold. And there's oral Torah, which is Torah Sheba'al Peh, Torah that is of the mouth, oral Torah. That's sort of like the rabbinic teachings that emerged, expanding on, enhancing, elaborating on, in many moments, subverting and reinterpreting the written Torah. So those two Torahs exist simultaneously. And Rabbi Nachman starts us off by saying a statement, again, that we could spend 1 hour talking about, which is oral law is the divine presence. Okay, that's good. That's a nice statement from Rabbi Nachman. And that's how he kicks off this conversation. Oral law, Torah Sheba'al Peh, is the divine presence. So Torah of the mouth, that's the divine presence. And then this next piece that we go to, if we scroll down, he's going to tell us what happens when we study oral Torah. Okay. Uchshe Adam lomed bikdusha uvetahara ezedin ufsak. And when an individual sort of sits down with the right mindset of purity, holiness and purity, and they start to learn some sort of deen, some sort of judgment, or psak, some sort of law, both are human created, explicitly human created, like groups of people did that. Shechidesh ezatana o tzadik acher, that some sage originated. That is the originated articulation of law or truth or teaching from some sort of righteous person or a sage that came before them. So when someone learns Torah that has been taught by individuals and Torah that has been originated by human beings, al yedei zeh, through this, naaseh bechinat nishikin. Kissing is made. or the act of kissing is done, or this brings into being some aspect of kisses. Nishikin literally being kisses. So Rabbi Nachman is saying when an individual learns Torah that has been originated by sages who came before them, or are potentially contemporaneous, like someone who's maybe living in your time too, that is a kiss. That what's happening in that moment is there is kissing happening, and he's going to explain a little bit what he means. There's kissing that happens. And nishikin, he says, is the binding of spirit with spirit. It is the binding up of the spirits that's happening that forms some kind of kiss. And he says the reason for that is because speech is a life force. And he uses a proof text from Genesis to sort of explain what he means by that. But speech is a life force itself. And so through the speech act, these two spirits are coming together. Okay, so that's part sort of like one of Rabbi Nachman. And if we scroll down a little bit, we'll get to sort of him continuing to spell it out. So essentially what he's saying is when a sage originates some insight and speaks this insight, this is the part that starts, yeah, exactly. This is a very long paragraph, and I'm going to start sharing it in the middle, basically. When a sage originates some insight and speaks this insight, the speech act itself is Torah sheba'al peh. It's Torah that came out of your mouth. It's oral Torah. That makes sense. That's fairly intuitive. And so based on that, when one studies the insights that have been spoken through someone's mouth, what they're doing is binding the teaching of someone else through their own mouth. So basically, what happens is through my speech act, I am resurrecting the ruach, the spirit of someone else's speech act, and they meet in my mouth for a moment, and we're kissing. There's an intimate moment of a binding of spirit where the chidush, the insight that has come before me, is in my mouth, and as it leaves my mouth, it touches my lips in some way, and there's a kiss between my words, which are bringing new life into the words of the sage before. So his articulation is basically, we find then that when a person learns a law or a teaching with which the sages instituted, specifically a human created law, that through this, the spirit of the sage binds itself with the spirit of the one studying. And it's as though the learner is exchanging a kiss with the sage. And so once people pass through to the eternal world, Rabbi Nachman says, when we learn their teachings, their spirit becomes bound with ours, like our sages taught in the Talmud, that original section that we learned at the beginning. Any scholar who is named in someone's teaching of their words, his lips mouth the words in the grave. So what does it mean that his lips mouth the words? That means they're kissing. So we'll push a pause there. I'm curious. I'd love to know what's coming up for you, Joe, as you're hearing this. But that's where Rabbi Nachman sort of leaves us, is what the rabbis meant when they said mouths are moving. They meant that we're kissing. We are kissing them. They are kissing us. There's sort of a mutual, intimate, and maybe erotic moment in the practice and power of learning.
Thanks so much, Laynie.
Yeah.
This is a provocative text to think of kind of generations of rabbis and teachers, whoever they be, kissing their rabbis who have passed, or kissing rabbis who are, it's not something that we think about. It's not something that it feels, uncomfortable in some way, because it feels, could be inappropriate. It feels like it could be an invasion of that relationship that's often quite, dare I say, professional, in an ideal sense. And I guess I want to see what do you think that the Rabbi Nachman, and what do you think that the Talmud is gaining from using this kind of kissing, the idea of kissing as a metaphor? What's added by that, and what's the importance of that intimacy that you get when you quote someone?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I also I think there are some real reverberations to be careful about in terms of eroticizing learning too much. I think that's a thing that we should be careful about, in lifting up the erotic too much in learning spaces, particularly given power dynamics and ways in which consent should live but doesn't always live in our communities maximally. So I appreciate sort of lifting up how provocative in a lot of ways this is. But I think for me, part of what's so powerful about this is the way it offers real, not just intellectual, but embodied intimacy with the teachings of our ancestors. I think it's I feel that kind of intimacy when I quote someone who I love, who has passed away. When I say something about them, I feel a certain kind of intimacy and warmth. And what I think Rabbi Nachman offers is the invitation for me to start to cultivate that for my intellectual ancestors, or for my spiritual ancestors who are, maybe it's not my Bubby, who I love quoting and thinking about and sort of sharing words in her name. It does bring intimacy and connection to me. And so I think of this not as sexual intimacy, but also potentially for Rabbi Nachman, I don't know. But I think just the power of feeling an embodied spiritual connection to the teachings that we're sharing beyond the intellectual realm feels just really opening and exciting for me.
100%. And I think it's definitely this balance between this text calling for kind of an inappropriate relationship with rabbis, but it's also calling for softness. It's calling for that an intimacy that we may not see as often today in rabbis. It's very serious. Talmud study is very serious. It's very intellectual. People engage with it on the level of the mind. But here it kind of says this is something deeper. It's really amazing to me that, everything that we see at the moment is through the lens of the lockdown and the lens of the pandemic in some way, which is frustrating. But there's also something to be learned, I think, through looking at something through a different lens, as we both appreciate in general. Now, there's something here about, as you said, and you mentioned it, kind of when you've lost a loved one, or you want to connect with someone, and you share a story about them. There's a way to connect with them when you have a lack of physical presence. That's something that feels so appropriate for now. But I wanted to ask you, to comment on that, but also to say, does this text for you in any way, when you read this text, what do you see, and how can it kind of impact someone who's in lockdown right now?
Yeah, for me, I so appreciate this question in just really lifting up what feels so timely to me about this text, which is lots of spiritual practices and spiritual experiences or spiritual technologies or mitzvot that we have as a people. When you do them alone, you are inherently alone. Right? Maybe if you're praying alone, it's you and God. And so we could argue that you're not actually alone. But part of what is true always if that's a theology that works for you, but part of what feels true to me and what this text I think lifts up is when you are learning Torah, you literally cannot be alone. You just can't, because the people who have articulated and written and taught these texts are in the text. And so it's like you can't be alone. There are characters and real people that are a part of your experience. And so I've just felt that so deeply during this time in moments of real loneliness, feeling so anchored in my practice of learning Torah, and specifically learning Talmud and learning teachings that are authored by people, specifically and explicitly, because of the ways those people are like accompanying me in this moment. And so I think this text really forces us to remember in an important way, learning Torah is not ever a solitary act. There is always a chavruta, that is a study partner or someone who is with you intimately, according to Rabbi Nachman, whenever you're learning text. And so that, I think, is a really helpful piece for me that comes out of this text.
Thank you. I wanna delve into this idea that the connection with one's ancestors, the calling and naming of one's ancestors and previous teachers, whether that be in the Torah or in any way. I want to talk about and see what you have to say about what's at stake when we don't. Like,
Yeah.
you mentioned at the beginning of this wonderful talk that there's a bit in the Talmud where all the Torah scrolls start ripping, spontaneously. What do you think is at stake in the loss of when we don't name the people that we learn from? We don't raise their spirit or kiss them in that way.
Yeah, I think to me, the main thing that this, my best guess at what I think this profound emphasis in the rabbinic tradition on naming where our learnings come from is about what happens to people, individuals, when they don't do that. The kind of person who is always aware of who has taught them and is always using their own teaching to uplift those teachings, that kind of person is the kind of person that the rabbis want to cultivate, I think. That is a practice that over and over, it's a practice. Like, people who are not familiar with just constantly naming teachers in their life, it's a practice that actually, I think, acts on us and helps us become more humble, helps us become more aware of what has shaped us, lest we think for a second that any idea we have is actually ours. Every idea we have is actually informed by so many teachers. So I think for me, that's what that is about, which is why the rabbis are so both deeply anxious about what happens when you don't do it, and so reinforcing of the idea that you must. Yeah, that's one guess. I'm curious. Yeah, I'm excited to hear if you have any other thoughts about that.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, to be honest. And this connection that one gets from naming someone. I think in so much of our history, there are so many unnamed people, and it's actually quite a revolutionary act to name people, especially when they haven't been named in the past, as a way to connect with them and feel like one has a history. And I think that the fact that, even though the rabbis didn't, always name every person that was involved in the process of making the society that they were part of, I think it's really exciting that the value was there in some sense, and that value can be applied to our society as well. Yeah, I want to give you a chance to say a last thought before we close up, and then we'll say Shabbat Shalom to everyone.
Yeah, just it's such a gift to be able to come back to this text. I've had such a sweet time digging into it and hearing your reactions, and really just want to offer that I hope that this text for some of us is agitational around the potential intimate and erotic components of learning, and also perhaps I think might give us a new lens to see the ways in which our loneliness is also coupled always by an accompaniment with those who came before us. So may we enter Shabbat with that feeling on both edges of that.
Thank you. That's so important to hear, and I'm sure our audience will appreciate that sentiment. Thank you so much, Laynie Soloman. Your Torah and your education, is always so good for us to hear and important for us to hear your voice. We're so glad that you came on It Says What. Thank you so much. I want to just highlight again for our audience that JW3 and Limmud will be hosting It Says What for the foreseeable future, but also that we've got our Tikkun Leil Shavuot Experience Revelation coming up next Wednesday. Tickets are only £5. You can give more to support JW3 Limmud and our freelance presenters. We've got Stephen Burkhoff reading Metamorphosis, David Schneider reading Lord of the Rings in Yiddish. We have Rav Avi Killip from Hadar. We have Rabbi Benji Stanley from Westminster Synagogue. We have plenty of different types of things, and anyone is welcome for one session or all of the sessions. Jacqueline Nichols will be running a Rebbitzins disco towards the end, and also Lynn Ruth Miller, a wonderful comedian and octogenarian, will be sharing some comedy for the lockdown. There's so much and something for everyone, so please join us on Wednesday night from 8:30 p.m. Book in the link below. Once again, thank you, Laynie Soloman. Thank you to our audience, and Shabbat Shalom.